In the suffocating parlor of Montgomery Ashcroft's manor, Clementine DuPont's silence was about to cost her everything she'd never dared to want. The grandfather clock's brass pendulum sliced through the thick August air of 1863, each tick hammering against Clementine's temples like a judge's gavel. She sat rigid in the velvet wingback chair, her gloved hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white beneath the delicate lace. Across from her, Montgomery Ashcroft adjusted his gold pocket watch with the precision of a man who measured worth in seconds and found her lacking. "Miss DuPont," he began, his voice carrying the weight of old money and older disappointments. "I'm afraid this arrangement simply won't do." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of shame through her chest. Clementine's lips parted, a breath of protest dying before it could take shape. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mirror, practicing the art of conversation like other women practice piano scales. But now, with Montgomery's pale eyes dissecting her like a specimen, every carefully prepared phrase crumbled to dust. "You understand, of course," Montgomery continued, straightening his silk cravat, "that a man in my position requires a wife who can engage. Society demands it. My business associates expect it." He paused, studying her face with the clinical interest of a botanist examining a wilted flower. "You're a lovely creature, I'll grant you that. But loveliness without voice is merely decoration, and I need a partner, not an ornament." The rejection shouldn't have surprised her. After all, she had been discarded before, by dancing partners who grew tired of her stammered responses, by dinner guests who stopped including her in their conversations, by her own father who had finally given up trying to coax words from his peculiar daughter. But somehow, she had dared to hope that Montgomery might see past her silence to the woman who lived beneath it. "I." The word escaped like a wounded bird, barely audible above the tick-tick-tick of the clock. Montgomery leaned forward, his expression more curious than kind. "Yes." Heat flooded her cheeks. The beautiful speech she had prepared, about how she could learn to be what he needed, how her quietness might be a blessing rather than a curse, dissolved like morning mist. Instead, she simply nodded, accepting his verdict with the same resignation. She had learned to carry like a second skin. Montgomery rose, smoothing his waistcoat with practiced efficiency. "I'll speak with your father about dissolving the engagement. Quietly, of course. No need to create unnecessary gossip." He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the crystal doorknob. "For what it's worth, Miss DuPont, I do believe you'll find someone more suited to your temperament. Perhaps a scholar or a minister. Someone who appreciates stillness." The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo forever in the suddenly cavernous room. Clementine sat in the gathering shadows, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that sounded deafening in the silence. Through the tall windows, she could see the last light of day painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful and fleeting as every opportunity she had ever let slip through her fingers, she had always been too much silence in a world that demanded noise, too much stillness in a world that prized motion, too much depth in a world that skimmed surfaces like stones across water. The sound of hoofbeats on gravel drew her attention to the window. A rider approached the manor, his silhouette dark against the dying light. As he drew closer, she could make out the broad shoulders and confident seat of a working man. No silk cravat or gold watch chain, just worn leather and weathered cotton that spoke of honest labor. His horse was lathered with honest sweat, and dust clung to his boots like earned badges of honor. This was no gentleman caller. This was someone who belonged to the world beyond these suffocating walls, the world of open sky and endless possibility that she had glimpsed only in dreams and half-remembered childhood stories. Her father had once told her tales of such men, those who carved their living from the raw wilderness, who spoke with their hands as much as their voices, who understood that true strength came not from bloodlines, but from backbone. The rider dismounted with fluid grace, his movements speaking of strength earned through necessity rather than displayed for show. Even from this distance, she could see the way he gentled his horse, his hands steady and sure on the animal's neck. There was something in his bearing that spoke of a man who had learned to listen to more than words, who might understand that silence could hold its own kind of truth. If sensing her gaze, the stranger looked up toward the window. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, time seemed to suspend itself like dust motes in afternoon sunlight. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was both respectful and somehow intimate, as if he were acknowledging not just her presence, but her worth. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by the kind of lines that came from squinting at horizons rather than counting coins. But his eyes, even at this distance, she could see they held a warmth that Montgomery's never had. They were the color of rich earth after rain, deep and honest and unafraid of what they might find looking back. Then he turned toward the front door, and Clementine felt something stir in her chest, a flutter of possibility that she had thought Montgomery Ashcroft had killed forever. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching as he disappeared beneath the portico, his purposeful stride carrying him toward whatever business had brought him to this place of broken dreams. The grandfather clock chimed the hour, its brass voice cutting through the golden silence that had settled over the room. Somewhere in the house, she could hear the murmur of voices, the creak of floorboards, the ordinary sounds of a world that continued to turn despite her small catastrophe. But all she could think about was the way the stranger had looked at her, not with pity or disappointment, but with a kind of recognition that made her feel seen for the first time in her life. It was as if he had glimpsed something in her that even she didn't know existed, something worth more than all of Montgomery's gold or society's approval. The minutes stretched like taffy as she strained to hear voices from below. Her father's booming laugh echoed from the entry hall, followed by the deeper, quieter tones of the stranger. She couldn't make out words, but there was something in that voice, a rumble like distant thunder, that made her pulse quicken. It was the voice of a man who had no need to fill silence with empty chatter, who understood that sometimes the most important things were said without words at all. Footsteps on the stairs. Her father's voice, growing closer. "She's in the parlor. Mr. Rollins. Been having a difficult day, I'm afraid. Perhaps you might." The door opened, and her father appeared, his weathered face creased with concern. Behind him stood the stranger, hat in hand, his presence filling the doorway like sunrise fills the sky. Up close, she could see the details. That distance had only hinted at, the strong jaw shadowed with stubble, the hands that spoke of honest work, the eyes that held depths she longed to explore. "Clementine," her father said gently, "I'd like you to meet Buck Rollins. He's here. About the horses, but—" He paused, glancing between his daughter and the cowboy. "Well, perhaps I'll let him explain." Buck stepped forward, his movements careful and deliberate, as if he understood that sudden gestures might startle a creature already wounded. "Miss DuPont," he said, his voice carrying the warm cadence of a man who had learned patience from working with frightened animals. "I hope I'm not intruding. Who was this dusty rider, and what business could he possibly have with the Ashcrofts on the very day her world had crumbled?" Clementine's breath caught in her throat as Buck Rollins stepped into the golden lamplight, his presence transforming the suffocating parlor into something altogether different. Where Montgomery had claimed space with inherited privilege, Buck simply inhabited it with quiet confidence, as natural as water finding its level. "Not at all," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow steady. Something about his unhurried manner made speech feel less like a performance and more like breathing. Her father cleared his throat, glancing between them with the shrewd eyes of a man who had spent decades reading horses and people. "Buck here has been working the cattle drives from Texas to Kansas. Knows more about horses than any man I've met, and that's saying something." He paused, studying his daughter's face. "He's offered to help with the training program we discussed, the one for the cavalry mounts." Buck's eyes never left Clementine's face, but his words were directed to her father. "War's been hard on good horse flesh, Mr. DuPont. Heard you're breeding some of the finest stock this side of Kentucky. Thought perhaps I could lend a hand, earn my keep while I'm passing through." Passing through? The question escaped before Clementine could stop it, tinged with something that might have been disappointment. Buck's gaze sharpened, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I only meant, that is, most men in your line of work don't stop long in one place. Most men in my line of work don't find much worth stopping for," Buck replied, his voice carrying undertones that made her pulse quicken. But sometimes a man comes across something that changes his perspective entirely. Her father, bless him, had the good sense to make himself scarce. Well, I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Buck, Clementine knows every horse on this property better than I do. Might be she could show you around come morning. He paused at the doorway. Dinner's at 7. I expect you'll join us. The door closed with a soft click, leaving them alone in the gathering twilight. The grandfather clock's pendulum seemed to tick more softly now, as if even time itself had slowed to accommodate this moment. Clementine found herself studying Buck's hands, strong and scarred, with calluses that spoke of honest work and gentle skill. Your father mentioned you'd had a difficult day, Buck said, settling into the chair Montgomery had vacated. He made no move to claim the space around him, simply existed within it like a man comfortable in his own skin. If you'd rather be alone, I understand. No, the word came out more forcefully than she intended, surprising them both. I mean, it's pleasant to have company. Different company. She folded her hands in her lap, then unfolded them, uncertain what to do with her nervous energy. Mr. Ashcroft and I, that is, we've decided we wouldn't suit. Buck's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Not pity, but understanding. His loss, he said simply, as if stating an obvious fact rather than offering comfort. You don't even know me, Clementine protested, then immediately wished she could take the words back. They sounded petulant, childish. I know enough. Buck leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to that warm rumble she had heard from the stairs. I know you've been watching the horses from your window every morning for the past week. I know you gentle them with your voice before anyone else gets near them. I know you see things other people miss. Her heart hammered against her ribs. How could you possibly know that? Been camped by the creek down the ridge. Your father said I could water my horse there while I considered his offer. Buck's smile was slow and genuine. Hard not to notice a beautiful woman who talks to horses like they're old friends. The compliment should have made her tongue-tied, but instead, it loosened something inside her chest. They listen better than most people, she said, then immediately covered her mouth with her hand. Appalled by her own boldness, Buck's laughter was rich and warm, like honey poured over cornbread. Reckon that's true. Horses don't much care if you're the quietest person in the room. They care if you're honest. And am I? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Honest, I mean. Honest as summer rain, Buck said without hesitation. Takes courage to be yourself in a world that's always asking you to be something else. They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the windows, the space between them charged with possibilities neither dared name. Clementine found herself studying the way Buck's hands rested on his knees, patient and still, like a man who knew the value of waiting for the right moment. The war, she said suddenly, needing to fill the silence with something safer than the growing awareness between them. Were you involved? Something shifted in Buck's expression, a shadow passing across his weathered features. Rode with the Texas Rangers before the fighting started. Saw enough to know that war makes beasts of good men and heroes of unexpected ones. He paused, his gaze distant. Lost my brother at Shiloh. Figured I'd done enough killing for one lifetime. I'm sorry, Clementine whispered, meaning it. He'd have liked you, Buck said, his voice soft with memory. Always said the best people were the ones who watched and listened before they spoke. Said they saw the world clearer than the rest of us. The grandfather clock chimed 6 times, its brass voice cutting through the intimate atmosphere like a knife. Soon, the house would stir with dinner preparations, and this moment would end. But for now, in this golden cocoon of lamplight and possibility, Clementine felt more alive than she had in months. Mr. Rollins, she began, then stopped, gathering her courage. Buck, would you? That is, would you mind if I showed you the horses tonight? After dinner, I mean. The moon's nearly full, and they're most beautiful in the moonlight. Buck's smile transformed his entire face, chasing away the shadows of memory and war. Miss DuPont, I'd consider it an honor. As if summoned by their words, the distant sound of artillery fire rolled across the hills like thunder, a reminder that the world beyond these walls still burned with conflict and uncertainty. But what did those guns mean for their growing connection? And who was riding hard toward the manor with news that would change everything? The rider materialized from the darkness like a harbinger of doom, his horse foam-flecked and trembling beneath him. Clementine watched from the dining room window as he thundered up the drive, his urgency cutting through the peaceful evening like a blade through silk. Beside her, Buck had gone perfectly still, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, every line of his body taut with the alertness of a man who had learned to read danger in the wind. Jeb Slade, her father muttered, rising from his chair with the quick movements of a younger man. He wouldn't ride that hard unless. The sentence died unfinished as the front door burst open without ceremony. Mr. DuPont. Jeb's voice cracked like a whip through the hallway. Confederate cavalry's moving up from the south. Maybe 200 men, riding hard for the river crossing. They'll be here by dawn. The crystal glasses trembled on the table as Jeb's boots thundered across the hardwood floors. He appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, sweat streaming down his weathered face. His eyes found Buck immediately, sizing him up with the practiced assessment of a man who had learned to distinguish friend from foe in the space of a heartbeat. "This is Buck Rollins," her father said quickly. "He's here about the horses." "Horses'll have to wait," Jeb replied grimly. "Colonel Beauregard T. Sinclair's leading them. Word is he's got orders to confiscate every mount suitable for cavalry use. Payment in Confederate scrip." He spat into the brass spittoon beside the door. "Might as well be paying with autumn leaves." Clementine's hand flew to her throat. The horses, her father's life work, the animals she had gentled from foals, the magnificent creatures that had become her closest companions, taken by force and ridden into battle where they would likely die beneath the guns of war. "How many horses you got here, Mr. DuPont?" Buck asked quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man accustomed to crisis. 43 head of breeding stock. Another 27 young ones, barely green-broke. Her father's voice was hollow with the weight of impending loss. "Took me 15 years to build this herd." Buck pushed back from the table, his movements fluid and purposeful. "That's too many to move quickly, but not too many to hide." He turned to Clementine, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You know every trail and hollow on this property? Better than anyone," she whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. "Then we've got work to do." Buck's smile was grim but determined. "Jeb, how much time do we have?" 6 hours, maybe 7 if we're lucky." They're moving careful-like, trying not to advertise their presence. Jeb's weathered face creased with worry. "But Buck, these ain't regular army. Sinclair's men are raiders, pure and simple. They've got a reputation for taking what they want and leaving nothing but ashes behind." The grandfather clock chimed 8 times, each note falling like a hammer blow in the sudden silence. Through the window, Clementine could see the first stars emerging in the darkening sky, beautiful and indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. "We'll need every man you can spare," Buck told her father. "And we'll need to move fast. The horses trust Miss Clementine's voice. She'll have to help lead them." "Absolutely not," her father said firmly. "I won't have my daughter exposed to such danger." "Papa," Clementine said, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it. "Those horses know my voice better than anyone's. If we're going to save them, you need me." Buck studied her face in the lamplight, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. "She's right. Fear makes animals unpredictable. They'll follow her where they might balk at strangers. And if Sinclair's men catch us," her father demanded, "then we'll deal with that when it happens," Buck replied. "But I'd rather take that chance than stand by and watch good horses die in a war that's already lost." Jeb shifted uncomfortably. "There's something else. Sinclair's got a personal interest in this place. Word is he's been asking questions about the DuPont breeding program. Seems he's got his eye on more than just cavalry mounts." A chill ran down Clementine's spine. She had heard whispers about Beauregard T. Sinclair, a man who had used the chaos of war to build his own private empire, taking what he wanted under the guise of military necessity. The thought of him walking through her father's stables, claiming ownership of animals that had been loved and cared for like family, made her stomach turn. "Then we'd better make sure he doesn't find what he's looking for," Buck said grimly. He turned to Clementine, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Are you certain about this? Once we start, there's no going back." The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Clementine thought of the horses she had known since birth, of the gentle mare who had carried her through childhood, of the spirited stallion who had learned to eat apples from her palm. She thought of all the times she had stood silent while others made decisions about her life, accepting whatever fate they chose to impose. "I'm certain," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Those horses deserve better than to die in someone else's war." Buck's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Then let's get to work." As they rose from the table, the sound of distant thunder rolled across the hills again. Closer this time, more insistent. But now Clementine realized it wasn't thunder at all. It was the sound of hundreds of hoofbeats, moving steadily north through the darkness toward everything she held dear. "They're moving faster than expected," Jeb said grimly, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "We've got maybe 4 hours, not 6. Buck was already moving toward the door, his mind clearly racing with plans and possibilities. "Then we'd better hope moonlight's enough to work by." But as they stepped into the silver-washed night, none of them could have predicted the choice that would soon tear Clementine's heart in two, or the devastating secret that Colonel Sinclair carried with him through the darkness. The moon hung like a silver coin in the star-scattered sky as Clementine led Buck through the maze of paddocks and pastures that had been her childhood kingdom. Her heart hammered against her ribs with each step, but not from fear, from the intoxicating rush of finally taking action instead of watching life happen around her. "The canyon," she whispered, pointing toward a shadow-dark cleft in the hills. "There's a hidden valley beyond the ridge where Papa used to graze the cattle in dry summers. Water, grass, and only one way in or out." Buck nodded, his eyes scanning the terrain with the practiced assessment of a military scout. "How long to get them there?" 2 hours if we push hard. But the trail's narrow. We'll have to take them in small groups." She paused, studying his weathered profile in the moonlight. "Buck, there's something else. The path winds close to the old Sinclair place. If he's got scouts out, we'll deal with it." His voice carried the quiet confidence of a man who had faced worse odds and lived to tell about it. "Your father's men are bringing up the rear guard. Jeb's watching the main road. All we have to do is get these horses to safety." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both freeze. Through the silver shadows, a lone rider emerged. But instead of the blue uniform they feared, they saw the familiar figure of Hank Redfern, one of her father's most trusted hands. "Miss Clementine," Hank called softly, his voice tight with urgency. "Your father sent me to tell you, we've got trouble. Sinclair's men took the river crossing an hour ago. They're moving faster than anyone expected." Buck's jaw tightened. "How much time do we have?" "Maybe 2 hours before they reach the main house. But there's more." Hank's weathered face was grim. "In the moonlight, Sinclair's got someone with him. Someone who knows this property. They're not just taking horses, they're looking for something specific." A chill ran down Clementine's spine. What could they possibly want besides the horses? "That's what we need to find out." Buck's hand moved to the pistol at his hip, a gesture so natural she barely noticed it. "Hank, can you get word to Mr. DuPont? Tell him to secure the house. And keep everyone inside. We'll handle the horses." As Hank disappeared into the darkness, Buck turned to Clementine with an expression that made her breath catch. "This is more dangerous than I thought. Maybe you should go back to the house with your father." "No." The word came out fiercer than she intended. "These are my horses, Buck. I won't abandon them now." Something flickered in his eyes, admiration mixed with concern. "You're braver than you know," he said softly. "But bravery without wisdom gets good people killed." "Then teach me wisdom," she replied, surprised by her own boldness. "Show me how to be both brave and smart." Buck's smile was warm despite the gravity of their situation. "First lesson, trust your instincts. What's that voice in your head telling you right now?" Clementine closed her eyes, listening to the night sounds around them, the soft nickering of horses, the rustle of wind through grass, the distant call of a night bird. But underneath it all, she heard something else, the faint jingle of harness leather and the muffled sound of many horses moving carefully through the darkness. "They're already here," she whispered, her eyes snapping open. "Not the main force, scouts, moving along the creek bed to avoid being seen." Buck's expression sharpened. "How many?" "Maybe 6 or 7. But Buck." She grasped his arm, feeling the solid strength of muscle beneath his sleeve. "They're not heading for the main house. They're coming straight for the breeding barn. The realization hit them both at the same moment. This wasn't a random raid for cavalry mounts. Someone had given Sinclair detailed information about the property, about where the most valuable horses were kept, about the best routes to approach unseen. We need to move. Now. Buck's voice carried the crisp authority of command. Can you get the horses out of the breeding barn quietly? The Mares will follow Luna. She's the lead mare. But the stallions. Clementine's mind raced through possibilities. They'll fight each other if we try to move them together. Then, we split up. Buck's decision was immediate and decisive. You take the Mares toward the canyon. I'll handle the stallions and follow when I can. Buck, no. You don't know them like I do. Thunder, the black stallion. He won't let anyone near him except. The sharp crack of a rifle shot split the night air, followed by the sound of splintering wood and frightened horses screaming. Orange flames licked at the edge of the breeding barn as men on horseback emerged from the shadows, their Confederate gray uniforms dark as storm clouds in the moonlight. Fire! Buck shouted, already running toward the barn. They're trying to flush out the horses. Clementine ran beside him, her skirts hampering her movement as they raced across the paddock. The acrid smell of smoke filled her nostrils, and she could hear the terrified whinnying of horses trapped in their stalls. Everything her father had worked for, everything she had loved since childhood, was going up in flames. The back entrance, she gasped, pointing toward a smaller door barely visible in the smoke. We can get them out that way. But as they reached the barn, a figure stepped out of the shadows, tall, elegant, with the bearing of a man born to command. Colonel Beauregard T. Sinclair's pale eyes glittered in the firelight as he surveyed the chaos with the satisfaction of a man whose plans were coming to fruition. Miss DuPont, he said with exaggerated courtesy, his voice carrying the cultured tones of old Virginia aristocracy. How fortuitous. I was hoping we might have a chance to meet. Buck's hand moved to his gun, but Sinclair's men already had their weapons trained on him. Don't be foolish, Mr. Rollins. We're here for the horses, not for bloodshed. Then why the fire? Buck demanded, his voice deadly calm that Sinclair's smile was cold as winter moonlight. Motivation, my dear fellow. Sometimes people need encouragement to be cooperative. His gaze fixed on Clementine with an intensity that made her skin crawl, especially when they're hiding something that belongs to me. I don't know what you're talking about, Clementine said, her voice steadier than she felt. Don't you? Sinclair stepped closer, his presence looming over her like a gathering storm. Tell me, Miss DuPont, what did your dear mother leave you before she died? Something small, perhaps? Something that might look like a simple locket but contains information vital to the Confederate cause. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Clementine's hand moved instinctively to the silver locket at her throat, the one her mother had given her on her deathbed, the one she had worn every day for 10 years without ever managing to open. But how could Sinclair know about something so personal? And what devastating secret had her mother hidden away that was worth burning down everything Clementine held dear? The locket burned against Clementine's throat like a brand as Colonel Sinclair's pale eyes bored into her soul. Around them, the barn fire crackled and roared, but the real inferno was the one building in her chest. A rage she had never known she possessed, fierce and protective and utterly unafraid. My mother died of fever, she said, her voice cutting through the smoke-filled air like a blade. She was no spy. Sinclair's laugh was cultured and cruel. Your mother, my dear child, was Delilah Montgomery, one of the most skilled intelligence operatives the Confederacy ever produced. The codes she developed are still unbroken. His gloved hand gestured toward the locket. And that pretty bauble contains the master key to every Confederate cipher currently in use. The world tilted beneath Clementine's feet. Her mother, quiet, gentle Delilah who had sung lullabies and braided her hair, had been a Confederate spy? The revelation should have shattered her, but instead, it crystallized something deep within her core. Her mother had been brave. Her mother had been strong. Her mother had been a woman who changed the course of history while the world saw only what she chose to show them. Even if that were true, Clementine said, her chin lifting with newfound defiance, it died with her. I don't know any codes. Perhaps not, Sinclair conceded, his smile never wavering. But you will give me that locket, or I will burn every horse in this barn alive. Behind him, his men tightened their grip on their weapons. The fire was spreading faster now, and the terrified screaming of trapped horses grew more desperate. Time was running out, and Clementine could see the calculation in Sinclair's eyes. He would sacrifice anything to get what he wanted. "Buck," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the roar of flames. "I'm here," he replied, his hand finding hers in the smoky darkness. His fingers were warm and steady, anchoring her to the present moment. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." The simple words broke something open inside her chest. For the first time in her life, someone was asking her to choose, not accepting her silence, not making decisions for her, but trusting her judgment completely. "The horses," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Save the horses first." Buck's eyes met hers, and she saw understanding flash between them like lightning. "On my count," he murmured. 3, 2, 1. Clementine finished, and yanked the locket from her throat with enough force to break the chain. The moment stretched like taffy as she held the silver pendant aloft, its surface catching the firelight like a captured star. Sinclair's attention fixed on it with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey, and in that instant of distraction, Buck moved. His tackle caught Sinclair around the waist, sending them both crashing into the nearest stall door. The colonel's men spun toward the sound, their weapons swinging away from the horses, and Clementine didn't hesitate. She threw the locket into the heart of the barn fire, where it disappeared in a shower of sparks and flame. "No!" Sinclair's roar of rage echoed through the burning building as he fought to throw Buck off. But the damage was done. Whatever secrets the locket had contained were lost forever, consumed by the same fire that threatened everything else she held dear. "The horses!" Buck shouted, rolling away from Sinclair's flailing fists. "Get them! Out!" Clementine ran toward the stalls, her hands already working at the latches. The Maras pressed against the wood, their eyes white with terror, but they knew her voice, trusted her touch. "Easy, Luna," she whispered to the lead mare. "Easy, girl. We're getting out of here." The smoke was thicker now, choking and acrid, but Clementine moved with purpose born of desperate love. One by one, she released the horses, slapping their flanks to send them charging through the barn doors toward the safety of the paddocks. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of fighting. Buck's voice mixed with Sinclair's curses, the crash of overturned equipment, the sharp crack of gunfire. "Thunder!" she gasped, reaching the black stallion's stall. The massive horse reared and struck at the door, too panicked to recognize her in the chaos. "Thunder, it's me. It's Clementine." For a moment, the stallion paused, his intelligent eyes meeting hers through the smoke. Then, with a sound like distant thunder, he plunged past her and out into the night. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames licking at the rafters like hungry tongues. Clementine stumbled toward the door, her lungs burning, her eyes streaming tears that had nothing to do with smoke. Behind her, she could hear Buck calling her name, but the sound seemed to come from very far away. Strong hands caught her as she collapsed at the threshold, pulling her into the sweet coolness of night air. "I've got you," Buck's voice whispered, against her ear. "I've got you." She looked up into his face, saw the soot streaks and the concern in his earth-brown eyes, and felt something settle into place inside her chest like a key turning in a lock. "The horses? Safe," he assured her, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "Every last one of them. Your father's men are already moving them to the canyon." Around them, the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame, taking with it the last physical connection to her mother's secret life. But somehow, Clementine felt lighter rather than diminished. The truth had been painful, but it had also been liberating. "Sinclair," she asked. "Gone," Buck replied grimly. "Ran when he realized the locket was destroyed. But he'll be back. Then, we'll be ready for him." The words surprised her with their certainty. Together, Buck's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Together, he agreed as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. They stood among the horses they had saved, watching the ashes of the old world settle into the earth. The war would continue, bringing its own trials and sorrows, but they had chosen each other, and that choice would sustain them through whatever came next. Buck's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining like the roots of two trees growing toward the same light. "Miss Clementine DuPont," he said, his voice formal despite the intimacy of the moment. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, the word carrying all the strength and certainty she had discovered in herself. "Yes, Buck Rollins. I will." As the sun rose over the Kentucky hills, painting the world in shades of hope and possibility, Clementine finally understood that sometimes the greatest courage was not in speaking loudly, but in choosing to speak at all, and that the right person would always hear the truth in your silence as clearly as the love in your words. The horses grazed peacefully in the morning light, their coats gleaming like burnished copper, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring, not in mourning for what was lost, but in celebration of what had been found. Friends, if this tale of courage found and love discovered has touched your heart, I'd be much obliged if you'd give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the heart of America, where love conquers all and courage blooms in the most unexpected places. Tell me, where are you watching from today?